A, Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, and West Virginia. I don't even have the schedule for this week. I have it in front of me. But let's start with this. KU, Jalen Daniels, they played Thursday night and won. Kansas State took care of their business. Avery Johnson was pretty good. They won. The running game was okay. And then Iowa State, of course, took care of their business. West Virginia, of course, was we mentioned them already. Among those four teams, Craig, your thoughts about what you saw from any of them that stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, for Kansas, it was just seeing Jalen Daniels healthy as much as anything else. Seeing Jeff Grimes' offense in action for the very first time. I thought that they, passed the test with flying colors. Interesting to have the atmosphere of, being in the middle of these stadium renovations and having to play away from home. So to have like the smaller setup was, I just wonder how that's going to play throughout the year, if like that matters at all or not. Yeah. But you know what? It was great to see Jalen Daniels. I mean, first and foremost, great to see him being able to do his thing. Didn't do too much, didn't get crazy with it, didn't need to, but they did what they needed to do to get a win and get out of there and feel like he passed the test. So now we don't have to sit there and go, well, if Jalen Daniels is healthy, now we've seen him. He's played, good to go. K-State, Avery Johnson is a very talented player, but there was a reason and a valid reason why the big criticism and the big question mark around K-State was his ability to pass the football. And I think that's going to be a work in progress, but I think while there is a lot of talent there, that is a work in progress and something he is going to have to get better at. Iowa State, Jalen Knowles, an awesome player. That was a little bit of a struggle, but they got the win and handled what they needed to get done as far as just getting the win in the first game. So that one was a little bit more low scoring and tighter than I expected in terms of the score.
Matt Campbell never blows people out.
No, that's why I'm not like freaking out about it. It was just from what I expected. I just expected them to have a little bit more breathing room when all was said and done. But that's what I anticipated we were going to get from Iowa State. And then West Virginia, extremely disappointing that you were not able to put up a better fight against Penn State. Not surprised you lost. Surprised a little bit in the fashion that you lost. So those are just kind of my quick takes from the first round of games.
K-State, Johnson was 14 of 21, two touchdowns and a pick. He didn't run much. He had 3 carries, 37 yards, which is probably, keep him in bubble wrap unless you don't need to. Giddens had a nice night. Edwards had a few carries. They took care of business. They beat UT Martin, which they should. But yet, like you said, it was
a slow start. It was a slow start than anybody thought, but they eventually got it rolling. There are questions, though. Like, there's a reason why you don't just put them at the top of the Big 12 and you go like, yeah, K-State, and anybody who says otherwise is an idiot. It's like, no, Utah looks on paper to be better. Oklahoma State, you put above K-State right now. Now, K-State's at worst probably like 3, maybe 4 if you want to put KU above them. I could hear you out on that. But, yeah, it wasn't the sexiest performance. They struggled a little bit in some areas, and those were areas that I think you thought they might struggle a little bit. So game one, that's kind of what is going to be the case most often.
They got Arizona in 2 weeks at home. That's good. They have to play at Tulane, but that could be a great game.
I'm curious to see how he, I'm going to sit here and tell you that I think that Avery Johnson will be better, but he's got to be better throwing the ball. Dylan Edwards scored 2 touchdowns in the game.
Yeah.
By the way, 1 rushing and 1 receiving. Kansas only has 1 more game in the Sporting KC. The rest are going to be at Arrowhead. So I'm wondering how.
Just 1 more. Okay, I thought it was more than 1.
Yeah. So they're 2 at Sporting KC. The rest are at Arrowhead. I wonder how Arrowhead though. Like, that's a big place. Like,
they're not going to fill that every week.
Yeah. So can you bring the energy like you do at Allen Fieldhouse for football for basketball, for football? I don't know, but you couldn't not like what you saw from them, and they had to play about 12% of the ability of Jalen Daniels. They have 2 really good running backs, Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw. They're going to be fine when it comes to offense. Jeff Grimes has the players that make that offense work at Kansas for sure. Iowa State looks like Iowa State. Like they handled their business, but I can.
They lost a couple offensive linemen, though, and I haven't made my rounds as far as like every little update with schools. I think they might miss some time. I haven't double-checked on that, but I know that was definitely a concern coming out of that game for Iowa State, was to be down a couple of linemen.
And playing an Iowa team that is going to maul you at the point of attack.
I think we'll get to this next round, but that was certainly – that was not a sexy game, but it was a win.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all you needed.
And West Virginia, most disappointing for me of the week. I thought that game was going to be a lot better. Again, not surprised they lost. I picked them to win. But I mean, again, they're playing Penn State. I just thought that game would be maybe more of a back and forth fight than Penn State just absolutely being every single aspect of that team is better than every single aspect of West Virginia's right now.
Yeah, I mean, it remained relatively close there for a quarter and change. But, yeah, about that second quarter, it started to get sideways real quick. I love watching Drew Aller, man. I think he's so good. And I think James Franklin's got a really good football team, and that's what gets lost in all of the anger and the frustration. And, I'm seeing a lot of West Virginia fans sniping at each other now because that's how it happens. I mean, that's what happens when your team loses, and especially a big game like that. I even saw our buddy Coos, saw a little clip of him. He's like, maybe we put too much on this game. It's like, no, man, like that needed to be hyped up. They just didn't play well.
Yeah,
They didn't hold up their end of the bargain. I don't think it's like a scarlet letter or anything, or, they're not going to be banished to never being able to compete for the playoff as a result of that. But yeah, it was definitely not what you thought you were going to get with all the hype surrounding that game.
Would you rather have played Penn State and found out you have a lot of weaknesses maybe you didn't know, or you'd played UT Martin and won 48-7?
Well, they probably would say UT Martin, so they would have been able to celebrate a win because there's a lot of frustration with Neil Brown and just, how that game went. But I look at it as this: Penn State could very well be in the playoff. I would not be shocked by that, just based on overreacting to this very first game. They looked really good. And they looked really good and much better than West Virginia on all sides of the football. So that, if anything, is maybe a difference in just the talent levels that you're starting to see across the country. You know what I mean? As far as the portal and NIL and power conferences and things like that. I think it was a wake-up call as to maybe just the disparity in talent is the gap's a little bit farther than you thought. And I think that's the concerning thing for West Virginia fans and maybe even Big 12 fans is like, oh, geez, is the gap starting to get like that to where, there's not many matchups we win at this point, especially ones like that. But we'll see. We need to see more of West Virginia. That was a bad first game, but against a really good team. Long way to go, and still an opportunity to go play for something at the end of the season.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's not too early to look at that as far as the talent level and how it's separating, because it's only going to probably separate possibly even more. But KU won, Kansas State won, Iowa State won, West Virginia did not. It's not the end of the world, but there sure was, when you have that kind of atmosphere like you had at Kyle Field, and you have that kind of a buildup for a game, highly anticipated game, and A&M was at least in the game. They just couldn't score, but neither could Notre Dame for the longest of time. West Virginia got beat up in their backyard. They got beat up in their backyard. And,
yeah, they did.
And that's got to be the most disappointing part.
I would say that now, granted, different feelings because of where they were given a year ago. West Virginia can still be optimistic about what's ahead, but I would say that two of the loudest and toughest places to play in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium and there in Morgantown were just rendered useless. And they probably felt about the same after the game, in that, like, here's a big moment for, us to make a statement, and neither one of them did, it was, they were made the statement and not, they didn't make it.
Here's the thing to me though, like I didn't pick West Virginia to win, but if I was going to, is the first game of the year, I wouldn't have picked them in week 9 against Penn State. Probably. Yeah. It's at home. It's all blank canvas. And so because of that, you had maybe more of an advantage, right? And so this was an opportunity, and it was one that was squandered. Penn State was better. There's nothing more to it than that. And if there is, then we'll learn that over the coming weeks and have that confirmed. If it is a Garrett Green problem or a Neil Brown problem or a whatever problem. But for starters, I didn't have West Virginia winning the league anyways. Like, they were very loud, or at least pundits or whoever was very loud about West Virginia's getting disrespected. What about Garrett Green? There's a lot of talk about Garrett Green this offseason. Yep. And I think Garrett Green's a fantastic player, but he was not on Saturday. Penn State made him not look like a fantastic player, and he made himself not look like a fantastic player in some ways. So there's a lot of room for improvement. They got to brush that one off and get onto the saddle once again, because there's a long way to go and the season's not over. But yeah, that obviously was a huge missed opportunity, and who knows how many times you get an opportunity to have the amount of eyes on you as you had then. But that's just part of the deal. And now you got to go back to the drawing board.
Well, there's a couple. I don't know why people were thinking that Penn State was vulnerable. I don't think it was that. I think we probably we probably felt a little bit more about West Virginia than what we saw.
Yeah.
Penn
That's
State
more
isn't
what
an
it was.
awful team. Don't know why everyone thought they were vulnerable. Somebody else mentioned that, hey, by the way, Penn State's really pretty good. The problem is they always have to play Ohio State every year.
Here's the deal with that game. It wasn't a disrespect to Penn State. It was they're both 0-0. It's the first game of the year. It's a madhouse in Morgantown. West Virginia expects they could be pretty good. If Garrett Green's what he's touted to be and is improved from a year ago, you think they have a chance. That's all that it was.
Right.
You thought they had a chance to pull the upset because of the circumstances. And then the ball was rolled out on the field, and it became very clear Penn State was much better regardless of the circumstances. And that's just the way that it was. I mean,
it wasn't
nothing more
like
than
they
that.
came out and just blew it West Virginia.
No, it took a little
out.
while.
It took a while, but when they hit that long crossing pattern or that post, and he took off.
It was Neil Brown went for it on fourth down. They got stopped, and then the snowball really got going around that point.
I think his ego got in the way, or his man. You got to.
Or you feel like you've got to. We can't. Field goals won't win this game. We've got to score touchdowns. Right. And in that case, I think that was the wrong call. I think you needed to just get points, and he decided to try to go for the touchdown. And that was just one of a combination of factors that kind of all got that snowball rolling to where early second quarter on, that was all Penn State.
All right, tomorrow, UCF. I'm not done. Okay. I know we'll come back to it. Tomorrow, by the way, somebody asked me, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and BYU will be in Dallas, by the way, to play SMU this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Houston fans, you have 24 hours to
cleanse,
to just
move on.
To get ready for whatever we have to break down.
Well,
with that,
I don't remember when that game kicked off. I just remember when I got to the press box and I kind of get set up and I looked at it was 24-0. I'm like, oh, damn. And I know we all of us have great respect for Barry Odom and UNLV. We've had them on. We have. But that game, that got out of hand. But we're talking about Houston. That's for
talk about Houston
tomorrow. All right.
So,
go ahead.
So the game's this weekend.
Yes. So we have the weekend. There's a couple of games in the Big 12 that'll be kind of fun to watch. Let's start with this one. Kansas State on the road against Tulane.
It's an interesting game, man. Tulane and John Summerall is a real deal coach. I think this is not a game where I feel like Kansas State's in upset territory, but I do think they're going to have to be on their P's and Q's. I don't think they're just going to roll in and have Tulane flop over for them. So you hope Avery Johnson's just a step better in the saddle and just continue to get comfortable with him running the show and having to do all the things required of a starting quarterback at this level. There's a lot to like about Kansas State, but this is a step up in competition, no doubt about it. And this will be a nice little test early on for them.
All right, Paul.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be tough. The last week warm-up games and all that stuff that most of these teams, except for West Virginia, had are over. The schedule gets tougher and tougher. Teams like Kansas State and Baylor are the same, where they only have one more non-Big 12 game going, right, for the rest of the year. And so it's going to get real, and it's going to get real fast.
Well, didn't Tulane beat K-State?
A couple years ago.
Yeah, they did a couple years ago. They got a really good back in Darian Mensah. I mean, if you look at the spreads right now, Kansas State's like a 9.5-point favorite. So that says something. I mean, typically, you'd have your early season conference matchups and, Southeast Louisiana, which is who Tulane played last week, be like 52-0. You see those, you just chalk up we'll destroy them. But Tulane's a different animal. And they've beaten you. They've beaten you recently. And you've got to respect what John Summerall's done and respect the talent they have on that roster. And if you don't, then you could find yourself in some trouble.
You mentioned Mensah. He's a quarterback.
So what I say?
Yeah, that's okay.
What I say?
Running back.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, he of course threw for 200 yards in their win. Iowa State and you cannot stop them. You can only hope to contain Iowa's offense in that game. Will be in Iowa City.
They did that last year in the same game where they scored a bunch
I will fight.
Scored a bunch of points and then turned around and they were Iowa again. I should their offense theoretically can go nowhere but up, because I don't know if it's humanly possible to see the microscopic levels of offense that could be if they went down. So it will be tough. This is a rivalry. This game honestly never makes sense to me. Every time I think Iowa State's got the better team than Iowa, and they'll have guys that are better athletes and all these things, Iowa somehow manages to beat them. Iowa owns this rivalry overall. So in the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy, I don't I don't know. I don't know if I even put this. I think I might have put it on the pick'em for week 2, but I never feel good about picking it.
I hope
I think I did. I got to check.
I hope so, because if it's as unpredictable as you're saying, that's the perfect type of game to put on there. It's one that's so unpredictable. But this one has been mostly dominated by Iowa over the years, but Iowa State has had their moment here and there, and this has been a very tough played game. I mean, regardless of the circumstances. So it's in Hawkeye territory. That's an advantage you give to Iowa. Obviously, I don't know how much that tilts the scales as far as my overall prediction goes, but from everything that I've seen, it tilts it even further in a direction where a lot of the sentiment is that Iowa is the big favorite here. So we'll see. I don't pretend and won't pretend to know a ton about them in terms of how they match up with Iowa State here on a Monday. Getting Kirk Ferentz back, is that good or bad for the offense that he is going to be back this week? I don't really know, but this one's going to be a rock fight. These two teams hate each other. It's always super physical and nasty, and I would expect nothing less. But I think Iowa State's got a good football team, and I think they're good enough to go and win this ball game. But history says that it's going to be a bit of an uphill climb.
47-23. Iowa has the advantage, so 67% or so of the games. Iowa State did win a couple of years ago in a rock fight, 10-7. And then before that, it was in 2014 when they won 20-7. They had a stretch. Iowa State had a really good stretch when they won 5 in a row back at the late 90s and early parts of 2000.
Yeah, but they had a really bad stretch with Matt Campbell up until 2 years ago when he finally was able to get a win where Iowa was just kind of dominating over the last decade. So
I'll fight you, Paul, about their offense. Do you know that I think in that game, did you guys see this note about Iowa's receivers? That they may have had some receivers catch more touchdowns in that game than the leading receiver for catching touchdowns a year ago.
Yeah, probably. I mean, they don't know, they didn't throw the ball. They didn't do it. It was
newsflash. Iowa's offense sucks. It has for a really long time.
It was an affront to football what they were doing.
Yeah, they didn't. Well, it's going to be fun. We'll see. It'll be a good test for Matt Campbell and for Ferentz as well.
Which I hope is a long time from now. But the day that Kirk Ferentz passes on and goes up to the pearly gates and St. Peter says, look, we got some questions. And he's going to be like, oh, did I swear too much? Was I too hard on the kids? He's going to be like, no, look, we had to watch that offense for a really long time, and that was just sinful.
Yeah.
So
there's
some purgatory you're going to have to go back and do.
You got
that was bad.
You could throw a forward pass. West Virginia, perfect time for them. They play Albany. We know that they played Baylor 2 or 3 years ago. That game's a 5:00 game on ESPN Plus. Albany, of course, has won games where they are, but this is obviously something West Virginia needs.
Yeah, it is. They'll take care of business, and I don't really have much to say. I mean, if there's a lot to say about this game next Monday, then that is a really bad sign for West Virginia, I feel like. Or they had a historic performance where they scored about 200-plus points. But anything in between, I think, would be a little bit more concerning. This is their get-right game after the disappointment of last weekend. Wash your mouth out and move on to the next one and get your first win and stay healthy and flash your skill guys and your talents and have fun on Saturday after not having so much fun this past Saturday. That's all this game is. This is your win that you bought on the schedule. So go handle that.
And they had such an unbelievable atmosphere. We had Ren Baker on Thursday or Friday. And of course, with McAfee donated $1 million to the NIL.
Very
and
cool.
All that.
Yeah, in honor of his old West Virginia teams, not just from him. That was a very cool gesture and cool to see him involved and out there. And, again, I saw our buddy Coos and other West Virginia fans who are almost shying away from now trying to get too excited because that was such a bad look. It's no, man, just win the next time. That's all there is to it.
If Penn State played all 131 teams and the Vegas put the odds on those. Now, again, I'll say they would be favored against everybody but 6 or 8 teams. They're that good.
They're top 10 to start the season. They're really, really good. So, I mean, that's got to be taken into account. And I don't think that anybody was under the impression that West Virginia was a top 10 team either. So this was to be expected to some extent. But they'll be fine this weekend, get some of their confidence back, and, like I said, get that first win and move on.
Illinois rolled in their opening game. They will host Kansas. We mentioned what Kansas did with Jalen Daniels and the fact, but they're playing Illinois coming up. That game will be in Champaign. They hammered Eastern Illinois. That's another one of those games that either you win pretty big or maybe there's like some eyeballs that are like, what's going on? Or you play good teams. But Illinois opens up with a 45-0 win. And now Kansas. This ought to be a pretty good game. Can Illinois dictate the tempo or does Kansas?
No, I think Kansas is going to dictate the tempo here. You kind of have differing styles with Brett Bielema and what they do in Illinois compared to Lance Leipold. Now, I think they'll play tough. I think that they will. Luke Altmaier's the quarterback at Illinois now, and he was at Ole Miss before and lost to Baylor in that Sugar Bowl, even though he didn't expect to play in it, which is part of the reason probably why it was got caught a little off guard there.
And that was like 3 years ago. He's a much different player now than he was back then.
But I expect this to be a nice little game for that offense and getting loose and maybe showing off some of their wide receivers that they're pretty proud of a little bit more. But I think the running game that they'll have between Highshaw and Neal and Daniels will be, what's the difference in most of the Kansas wins this year?
Yeah, I mean, Illinois had a good start. This one is in Champaign, which I do think that matters most of the time. Doesn't always guarantee a win by any means, obviously, but it is notable when you have what I consider is going to be a close competitive game. I still think Kansas wins, but I think it's going to be really tough. I think they're going to have to play well and not make many mistakes on the road against a team that's, comparable in talent level. So I like what Illinois has been doing, but I like what Kansas has been doing a bit more, especially when we didn't see Jalen Daniels run around at all last week. And they're being smart and protecting him, but I think we'll see maybe him let loose a little bit more. And certainly he's got a lot of weapons around him. So I think Kansas wins this game. I don't want to make every game these conference comparisons because I said at the start of the show, like that's just gotten so crazy, but it's a Big Ten opponent. It's a Big 10, Big 12 matchup. So if you're into bragging rights and conference records and things like that, here's a big opportunity for the conference to go get a win over a respectable Big Ten opponent. But it's not going to be a guaranteed thing by any stretch for Lance Leipold and company. They're going to have to play well, and if they're able to go in there and get a W, then that's a great start.
Illinois is a big school. They Bielema does a nice job. Sometimes they're a little bit boring the way they go about their business, but Kansas can't go in there and like have a couple of things go wrong early, although they are good enough to come back from any kind of deficit. So those are the four teams tomorrow. UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, and also BYU will be a part of the pod. What will be Roman